Well, you can make it as complicated as you want, because there should be one place on the planet that you say is where I'm from, because that's where our spirit is. We can't have our spirit spread all over the place, because we get confused, and it gets confused. So that's why it said too that we always have to slow down, let our spirit catch up. And if my spirit feels like it belongs here, this is my home now. I'm not a visitor, because if I'm just a visitor, I won't respect the land the way I would if it's my home. So that's why when someone's adopted, it's not for ceremonial purposes. When they do that, you have to now start treating people as your family rather than, well, I'm just a stepchild. I made that mistake when my second wife had 3 children. We were in Heidelberg, and I introduced them to my grandmother, to my nun, and I introduced them as my stepchildren. And when they walked away, when they left, she grabbed me. She says, sit down, dear boy, I'm going to show you something. And she stood there for a while. I was sitting there. She said, don't ever do that again. She says, you're their father. They look to you for protection, for love, for somebody that's going to take care of them. So you're their father, they're your children. Don't ever do that to them again. I never did. So this is one of the ways in which we talk about when it's talk about respect. But what it is, it's holding everything up to a higher esteem than me. My uncle, Todd Morrison, when he did a prayer for food, he said, he started off with saying, I'm very poor for this food. In other words, what he was saying is, I don't ever put myself above anything. This food is what keeps me going, and so I have to hold it up higher than me. So I'm very poor for this food, and the word humility is in Haida. It's referred to as don't talk like a slave. In other words, when a person is campaigning for office, their stature is no longer how tall they are. It's how small they're really trying to make somebody else look. By saying, I this and I that, and everybody else is below me. So that's why many people never ran for office, because they didn't want to have to do that. And so when you say where you're from, my mother was from Oklahoma. She lived in Heidelberg, well, for most of her adult life. She died when she was 59. But Heidelberg was her home. And so that's where I was born in Ketchikan, but Heidelberg was my home. I say it in the past tense because I don't think it's there anymore. The whole thing is all different. The values, the relationships, they're all different. So even if I go home, I'm a stranger. So in many ways, Vancouver, I've been here longer than I lived in my own village. It's going on 30 years now. I've been here in Vancouver. Well, 29. And then I was in Lethbridge for 5 years before that. I mean, Lethbridge and Calgary. So I left home when I guess I was in my 40s, yeah. 1986, I was 45. So now I've been gone for over 30 years. So anyway, that just, but however you want to say it, that's where you're from. Nobody can say where you're from. Nobody can say who you are, what you are. Your identity is your own. Each person carries their own identity. And the biggest insult I can give anybody is to say you're wrong. Because when I said it, I'm saying I'm right. So anyway, that's just a way of saying Heidelberg's Urs Egen. Or if you answer the phone, when they say, hello, who's this? They say, Claude, it's me. Claude. Yeah, Claude, it's me. And the way I'd heard was the person picked up the phone and says, Dr. is that you? Claude. Yes, it's me. But one of the values that's prevalent throughout the world is this, I'll say glorification of war. There's statues and monuments and graveyards and some people will talk about how they died gloriously. They're dead. So anyway, I put together this thing. It's a term in Haida. It's called Haida. Sorry to pronounce it. That G with a line under it. Dog. Haida. So that paper, I think I left you one there. The one with a lot of lines on it. This one here. You've got one or two. See, that's what that is. Haida. It's been translated to war fighter. But we didn't have wars. War, there was the concept that was brought to us. Many of our conflicts were resolved by games. One's called stickball. I played in an exhibition game in Louisiana, and they used, like lacrosse uses that one stick with a net on it. This one uses two. And the ball is about the size of a ping pong ball. And they don't have a net. At the end, each end of the field is a stick. I don't know, stake. Oh, not quite, about half as big around as this cup. It's sticking up, about this high. And the person carrying the ball has to hit the stick with the ball to be able to score a point. They can't kick you, they can't punch you, but they can do whatever the hell they want with those sticks. And usually, when those games were going on, if this was involving something short of warfare, the one with the last player left standing won. But I thought I was in pretty good shape. This is 1988, so I was in my 40s. I was really hauling tail, running downfield, and this woman ran up behind me and whacked me on the side of the knee. When they have those games, the real games, they'll have 5 or 6 ambulances standing by.
Oh my gosh.
It's a very, very tough game. And with Haida, sometimes it would settle with wrestling, but it's not anything like a Greco-Greek or whatever wrestling. A part of it, it was strength and endurance, where each of the combatants would put his hand behind the neck of his opponent, and then with the left hand would grip the person's forearm. And the objective was to bear that person down. And sometimes they would circle. They've said that one of them one time went for 2 days. Neither one of them could. And they can't take a break either. If you got to go to the bathroom, you stay and you keep going. And one of the games we played in school, when I was in high school, you take a chest of drawers about this high, take a broom handle, and one person on each side. And they grip the broom handle and start pulling. And pull it right to the middle and hold it there, pulling as hard as you can without pulling it towards you. You have to stay right in the middle as long as you can. And the first one to break loses. And so you're pulling on this part here and also with your arms, and pretty soon you can see the thing starting to shake. And be surprised, sometimes the guys with the big muscles aren't the guys that win. And then there was another one they used to do, and I would watch them. It was called pulling fingers. There were two men would lock fingers like that and pull. And they could pull the other person across the table and they'd win. And I saw them actually dislocate another guy's finger, because he wouldn't let go. And part of it was having a grip strong enough to really cause the other person some pain. And then another way they solved it, or a conflict, was with that bone game, that gambling stick game. I don't know how they decided or how it was done, but there was betting going on at the same time. Well, the same as two sides of gambling. But they used that for settling arguments too. And when it did go to armed conflict, the European version of it was called unconditional surrender. In other words, if we go to war, the objective is for me to totally dominate you, to subjugate you and take whatever you have. And that's where museums came from. The victor would take the wealth of the ones they'd vanquished and put them on display. And so this later became how museums came into being. And so when the Europeans were taking our totems and all the other things and putting it on display, they conquered us. And so, in some ways, it's good that they took some of those things because they still exist. But there would have been no need for it if they weren't so voracious, never satisfied with how much they were taking. But that was just the nature of the beast. They'd had generation after generation learning to do that. So they saw people in the Western Hemisphere as pushovers. In the States, they had the thing called manifest destiny. It was the white man's destiny to take the whole continent. One of the things they did in California with the tribes there was a practice that was started in Western Europe when the Romans invaded Western Europe. The priests went along with the legions, and what they did was the soldiers would round up these barbarians or heathens, whatever you want to call them, and the priest would baptize them, then they would kill them. because they got paid so much for each baptism, and if there's a backslider, they had to give back the money. But this way, there was no backsliders. So when they got to California and Texas, especially California, what they would do is they'd round up all the men they could catch, baptize them, and they had a big pit. They'd make this, Indians dig this big pit, and they'd stand in a pit and they'd shoot them all, and then bury them. But it got pretty expensive, all the gunpowder and bullets. So they figured out a cheaper way of doing it was after they baptized everybody, they'd put them on a ship and take them out in the Pacific and throw them overboard. So they killed maybe 1 million people like that. And so when we hear people talk about, you know, the Christian thing about the love of Jesus and the love of God is love and all that, they demonstrate quite the opposite. There are people who do hold of those teachings. We had a preacher like that in Heidelberg, a guy named Mr. Parker. And Mr. Parker was probably one of the most gentle people I ever knew. His wife and he never had a bad word for anybody. And the preacher before him was a man named Mr. Gall. And Mr. Gall was very much like that too. And my grandmother became a Christian in 1900 when she was 16 years old. She was born in 1883. But anyway, she and the other ladies went across the channel to an island out there to pick these low-bush cranberries. And that was on Saturday, and on Sunday she didn't show up at church. And so Mr. Gall asked one of the other ladies, "Where's Mrs. Morrison? She's always here." "Oh, she's not feeling well." So he went to see her, and she was in her kitchen, and she had the oven door open. She was sitting there with a blanket, on her lap, and her feet up on the oven door. And he came in, and she greeted him, and he said, "I'm sorry to hear you're not feeling well." She smiled and said, "That's all right, it's just between my legs." And his face got red, he got embarrassed, and she realized it said not quite exactly what she meant. What she meant was that her thighs were sore from getting down to those low-bush cranberries. "That's all right, it's just between my legs," is what she said. And she would tell that story, and they would laugh about it. But it didn't have all those negative undertones that became such a much of what happened with the residential schools, because you could tease about, I guess you'd call it sexual innuendo type joking without people getting upset about it. And so when you take a look at war was unconditional surrender. In Haida, if a bunch of Haidas come after you and they've got something tied on their head, it means they're going to take prisoners. They're not going to kill everybody. But if they have it tied on their waist, they're not here to leave anybody alive. But that was a very extreme circumstance. There was a man who lived across the road from us. He was a product of residential school in Manitoba. He ran away from Jesuit school and in the late 1800s, and he ended up in Victoria, BC. I don't know how he got from Manitoba to here, but I guess he walked. Anyway, he was adopted by one of the families in Massive, and then he came over to Alaska. And he was a very mean person. And when I started learning about the residential schools, then I thought I understood why he was like that. Because he made his sons pretty mean. And he did, and the grandsons, some of them were treated the same way. But once it starts, there has to be some way of stopping it. of changing that orientation of how you see the world. But anyway, there was an old lady, we called her Giihlgiigaa. Her husband was like one of my grandfathers because we're the same crest. Anyway, she looked out her window and 2 houses over, she saw this man had his wife on the back porch. It was built on piling above the beach like that. And he was slapping her and knocking her around. And so this Giihlgiigaa, she grabbed a dish towel or something and tied it around her waist and took off running over there. She went through the back door and picked up a chunk of firewood as she was going through. She pulled open that door and she just clubbed this guy on the back of the head, knocked him down. And he started to get up and he saw that tied around her waist and he just rolled over onto the steps and took off running. He knew she was going to kill him. But he never lifted a hand to his wife again. At least nobody ever saw him because he knew she'd come over and kill him. See, if it's tied on your head, you can feel your pulse. So you have to remind yourself that, this is another human being. Because taking another life is not a natural thing. There's never any real justification for taking another life. It's usually out of anger or a sense of self-righteousness. But maybe there are some people that shouldn't be permitted to continue. But that was never left up to an individual to make that choice. Something that I think what happened, just from reading history, is that when you start getting a larger and larger population, there's some people that are aggressive, they're very ambitious, but there's nobody really to control them. And so they can disappear and then they start showing up and it's too late. See, that happened with the Aztec, with the Incas, with the Toltecs, and so they had large populations. And I think it was beginning to happen with the Hurons too, because they were getting to be pretty good-sized populations, some of the eastern tribes. With the Lakota people and Dakotas, when the Europeans arrived, the pressure from the east pushed them out into the prairies. And so what happened is when they got out in the prairies, there were the Arapahoes and the Crows were caught between them and the Blackfeet to the west. And both of them were much larger, and so they were really having some problems surviving because the encroachments. And then when Custer came along, the Crows and the Arapaho were the scouts for Custer. For them it was a matter of survival. And so even today, though they're, well, not so much now, but when I was in school in Kansas in 1960, the Arapahoes would only speak their own language, and it was only among them they'd stay by themselves, in the same way with the Crows. And yet the Crow language is almost the same as Lakota, but they were isolated like that because of their attachment to General Custer. And so when we see that thing, then generation after generation, these feuds begin, and so the question becomes, how do we stop it? And we stop it with ourselves. When somebody says, I'm a warrior, okay, if you're a warrior, what do you do if you see a woman being abused or a child being abused? Do you step in? Do you say anything? Or do you become an abuser too? Because by definition, pretty much, a warrior is somebody who's always in a state of war. But people define it differently depending upon where they're from. There's in Haida this thing called a war fighter. The only time that applied is either when you're engaged in a fight, you're coming back from a fight, or before you've gone through the purification ceremony. The sweat house was, depending on the size of the village, it was aligned east-west, but more of an there was something to do with an equinox, and it had a peak roof, a sloped roof on it, and like rafters or support beams, where you could hang a cedar bark mat to change the space if it's used for one kind of ceremony. But this one was when you've been through a fight, you couldn't go back into the village. You had to go to this sweat house, and you go in there, and this is when you're reborn. And then you can come back on the other side as now you're peaceful, you can be accepted back in the village. But it didn't matter if it was a man or woman. If they were in that war party, I guess you'd call it, they all had to go through the same process of becoming reborn. And so we don't have those ceremonies anymore for returning veterans. And so a lot of them suffer because there is no ceremony for them. It's one thing to get up there and salute and march around and wave flags and blow bugles, but what does it do for the spirit of that person? Because it's said that if I take the life of another human, I'm responsible for that spirit. And so that's what I do, is I go through that process to acknowledge that spirit that is now, that person is no longer there, but that spirit has to go someplace. And
if there was a need for it, though, couldn't we learn some ceremony to help our veterans too, if that could happen?
a ceremony for what?
For returning veterans, if that should be needed.
I started to do it once, and I ran into some difficulty because I was accused of talking against Jesus.
Oh,
Jesus. So I stopped. There's a ceremony for calling people back from the dead, and part of that is to call that spirit so that you can sort of rebalance the imbalance kind of thing.
So when you don't go into the steam house, do you become indigo?
What's that?
When you don't go into the steam house to become peaceful, do you become Wendigo, like you just want to kill to kill?
It's very possible. But we had a sort of what you could sometimes refer to as a wild man, because they didn't want to use his name. But that one is very malevolent. That's the one that will go and will kill people. And so that could be that one. Or sometimes that person is affected by Kugan. That's that mouse that will get into a man's anus, get inside his body. And it's very jealous, so it'll turn that man against anybody that this person loves. And even to the point where he'll begin killing his own family.
Like in Fast Crime?
Mm-hmm.
You see no mouse, but he killed his family.
Yeah, it's very similar. This man, Lawrence Bell's father, Adam, told me that he saw one of those ceremonies where they were trying to get rid of that Kugan from this man, because the first step was when somebody would recognize what was happening to this person, they'd say, we're going to go to Toe Hill to get medicine for this. And sometimes that was enough to change it. But if it didn't, the ceremony is where they put sand on the belly of this person, and they'd build a fire on top of it, and then the heat would drive it out. But I don't know the ceremony that's involved with it. I only was told that part of it.
Who did you say?
Coogan.
No,
Or
the person who was performing the ceremony, or who saw it.
that's Haga. Haga. Haga is that, well, people call witch doctor, medicine person, whatever. Only Haga would do that. It wasn't everybody running around during ceremonies. That was this person, Haga, was responsible for taking care of the mind, the body, the spirit, the soul, all those things. And if that person failed to protect the people, that person could no longer be Haga. That doesn't mean that they would kill this person, but his office was taken away from him. He could no longer be that person. I don't know whether the Hagas ever got married or not, but I know they were buried a different way. I mean, after they died, their remains, they'd find a sort of like a partial cave or rock overhang, and that's where the body was put in there. And north of Heidelberg, there was one of those places, and I guess I was a kid, pretty small at the time when they found it, but there were baskets. They were big enough for each one to hold the body of an adult person. And there were 3 of them. And one was, I guess, a male. There was this Haga, they could tell by the things that were with him. And there was a woman, and all they could tell about this woman was her hair was red. She was redhead. And the other one had a child. There was a child in there. And they were sort of mummified. And it was said that somebody stole them. And there was a cave where there was a body in there. And my uncle, Delbert Nix, told me that when he and his, and Haida, his brother, found it in a cave, it said when it touched it, it was like hitting a drum. If the skin was real tight and sort of like a mummy, but they didn't take it out of there. So it could have been another Haga. So the ceremonies, there are certain ceremonies were sort of assigned or to certain people. Some of them were born into it. It was ascribed. And like I was assigned this one, Friay August, and there's another one for protecting your luck when your luck is leaving and things are starting to fall apart, and it doesn't ever seem to go the right way. It says that if everything's going wrong, maybe you're in the wrong lane of oncoming traffic. So there's a way of getting off that. And what it was this person would spend a certain amount of time getting herself in balance. I use the word it because we didn't have gender pronouns, so it could be male or female. But this person would get itself in balance, but it was usually, from what I heard, was a man, and they would go to a large cedar tree and take some bark, a big enough piece to make it like a cone, almost like a teepee, that was, we'll say, about 4 feet high, and or maybe a little bit higher. But anyway, that person had a fire pit and would build fire and put rocks in there to heat them up, get them out hot. And he had a bowl made of powder. Squeeze, go. Come on in. It's okay. Just no sneezing. But anyway, that person would have that bowl made of powder, and in it was water that's actually tea made from Devil's Club. And so that person, when that fire burned down, that person would take the rocks out of there, so there's no embers on it, no smoke. They'd have another place set up for that, and would put them in there, and then would either sit or stand and close that cone shape with just his head sticking out, and hold the edges of that cedar thing closed somehow. And then he would start singing his song, and he would take that moss from a muskeg, I think it was, and it would be soaking in there, and he'd pick it up and squeeze that Devil's Club tea onto those hot rocks, and it was like a sweat. But he would be singing his song until he used up all the water, and then he would open it, and then he would take that cedar and rekindle that fire, and put the things that he used in that ceremony, he would burn them. And this was the way that he could restore his luck when things were going bad. But if a person was looking to find their own song, it usually would take about a year of every day of going down to the ocean. Well, people did that anyway in the morning, and immersing yourself up to your neck in cold water. That was a part of it. And I think the other part was periodically that person would make Giihlgiigaa, that tea from Devil's Club with seawater. And it was like a very powerful laxative. It would just clean out. Sometimes it also caused you to throw up. So it cleaned you out inside. But that wasn't done on a regular basis. But anyway, when that person was ready, they would go and find a stream, a small stream that's running to the west, and follow it till they found a place where they these ferns would grow to where they're just a bit more than waist high, and that person would take one of those ferns and split it with his thumbnail. If he could do that without it breaking, then that was part of a test of being ready. And then that person would take, again, that Giihlgiigaa and that moss, and facing to the west, he would sit there all day and all night, and then he would drink water, a little bit of water in the morning. And it said, if after the sun has gone up and come down 4 times, and your song still hasn't come, that means that you're not quite in balance or ready, so you do it for a 5th night, a 5th time. And if the song doesn't come then you have to start over a whole year again to getting yourself ready. But this song is more than just words. The song is just a manifestation of your way of making visible the rhythm of life, so that you can see the rhythm of life, the rhythm of the universe, and you can fit yourself into it. And I tell people it's like doing double Dutch jump rope. You gotta know the rhythm, otherwise you walk in, you get whacked on the side of the head, feet get yanked out from under you, whatever. And so life is like that too. If you don't fit into the rhythm, it's gonna knock you down. So once that person gets that song, then that's the song the person would sing when their luck is going through. But fasting, the way you hear the prairies people do it, this was sometimes something in the village is going haywire. People are getting sick, people are getting hurt, things are getting broken. Then this Haida will go to the high place and take an assistant, and they build a shelter. It's just a half shelter, just 2 poles and then one across, and sometimes another one. And they take spruce branches and lay them on there so that if it rains, the water runs down off it. And on the inside, that person would put clean sand, and then the branches from the hemlock, the western hemlock tree, we call those needles Xil, X-I-L, Xil. That's medicine. And there's also the needles from that tree. And then that person sits in there, and it said he doesn't drink water for 10 days. His assistant takes care of him. And then on the night of the 10th day, that assistant, when the tide is at the lowest after sundown, after the sun has come down, will go down to the lowest point and dip out some seawater and bring it back to the shelter. That person would drink it, and it says then fierce things would come in after this person. I assume he's probably hallucinating, maybe. But anyway, fierce things would come trying to drive him out. And if it scared him to the point where he stepped out of there, then all he'd done so far is wasted. So this would go on the night of the 13th day. It said something will come into that shelter, that he would catch it. It was a mouse. And he would do something to it. He would injure it in a certain way. Maybe he might blind it one eye. Maybe he'd break an arm or break a leg, and then let it go. And then in the morning, he would drink a little bit of fresh water, and a little bit of fresh water, so that he'd get his system back going again. Then they'd go back into the village, and whatever he did to that mouse, if that happened to any person in the village, that's the one that's causing it. And so then some remedial action was taken. One lady there at home, her husband was one of my dad's uncles. She had a little store. Come on in.
Hi. I was lost.
But now I see. But anyway, she lost some. She had a store, and her money disappeared. Somebody stole her personal money. And so she asked her grandchildren who did it, and none of them would confess. So she went down to the beach at low water and took a small can and turned over rocks, and there's little crabs under those rocks. And she got a bunch of them, filled the can up with little water in there, and brought it in, then sent for all her grandchildren. And her husband was there. And she poured the water out, and then she took the can and took the middle room, she turned upside down like that. And she said, no, if anybody here took my money, now's the time to save, because if you don't, we're going to find out, you're going to be very badly embarrassed. Nobody said anything. So she went over and she lifted that can. Those crabs started kind of milling around. Then they started crawling toward her husband. He started kicking at them, saying, "Bullshit, bullshit." He was the one who took her money. But I hear stories like that, different ways in which they would do that same thing. But it seemed to work. People understood, you know. I guess maybe the person knowing they're guilty or whatever it was would draw them to him. I don't know what it was. But anyway, so you introduce yourself, you say your name, then Xaad Kil.
Say my name first? Okay. Michelle,
Kil. On. The G sound. Yeah. See, Kil. But that last part there by itself, is yes, but that's not what it means. It's part of the word there, Kil. That this person, Kawansanga is how this person is called. So I don't say me or I refer to myself as this person. And the other one down there, Heidelberg Stort Agent. Heidelberg is my hometown. Heidelberg Stort Agent. So that's where I come from, Heidelberg. And the other one at the bottom, Slow Agent. That just means it's me. Slow Agent, Kawansana, Xaad Kil. But Klau. Yeah, we had, any of you still have these command words, commands? Do you have any of them? Oh. That's a dangerous thing to give women permission to give commands. Wink, wink.
I guess there were not very many women in the Navy when you were there.
The worst chewing out I ever got was from a female officer.
Ooh.
Oh, did she chew me out? It was winter time. I was stationed at Great Lakes Naval Training Center going to electronics school. And it was kind of a blizzard because the wind had come right across the Lake Michigan. And I had my hands in my pockets and I was walking with my head down. And I saw this person go by, and I knew when I saw it, this was an officer just by I could only see from about the knees down, but I pretended not to see it. Sailor! Yes, ma'am. Boy, she reamed me out for not saluting an officer. But we would get even with guys. Like one officer was always insisting we salute him. So one day we saw him coming, and there was about 6 of us, so we stretched out in a line. And so when you salute an officer, he has to return the salute. So the first one saluted, he returned the salute, he was on a bicycle. Yeah, rode a little ways, and then the second one, so he's trying to ride his bicycle and return salutes. That's how we got in with the guy. But there really weren't very many. I was on a seagoing command, so there were no women on board. And I think it took something like 12 people on the beach to support one man at sea. Because you had so many electronic stores, foods, all kinds of administrative stuff. And so I didn't see very many women in uniform. Not. The only time I did was when I was sent to Newport, Rhode Island, to go to a specialized electronics school, and they had a boot camp there for the women. And
why do you think that there wasn't very many women involved?
I didn't see very many. That's what I said, because my brother's daughter was in the Navy, U.S. Navy. She went to what they call corps school to be like a medic. And when she finished her military duty, she went and she wrote the exam to be a registered nurse, and now she works in an OR in a hospital in Alaska. And I forget my another niece, she joined the Marine Corps, and she got into some kind of administrative thing, got quite a bit of training from that too. But that's what a lot of Native people, in fact, in the States, the single largest nationality of people in the military and the intelligence services are Native Americans. You know who Will Sampson, the actor? He would play Ten Bears in the outlaw Josie Wales. Anyway, he was in naval intelligence. And I ran into one of the guys that I went to school with. He was one of the first Navy SEALs, a guy named Left-Hand Bull, Floyd Left-Hand Bull. So throughout the military, there's a lot of Native Americans in the U.S. military. And I thought that the training was really teaching you self-discipline, not necessarily to learn how to go kill somebody. And the probabilities of ending up in a combat situation is rather small when you take a look at the overall size. Like that base that was in Masset, that huge intelligence gathering station, that's what that was. They had this huge place with all these big antennas on it, and they were gathering electronic intelligence is what they were, and they were U.S. Navy. And there was a submarine base in Prince Rupert. I mean, they pull in there to refuel Prince Rupert.
In Manitoba, they have a base, or they have one in Brandon, Shiloh. All the Germans come, they like to marry the native women. They like to recruit on the reserves too, and my uncle's got in there. It's just because location.
Mm-hmm. One of my
auntie married a German from the base.
One of my cousins is now, I think she's 91 now or 92, but she joined the Marine Corps around the time of the war in Korea. So at home there, you know, men and women joined, because my village had only a little over 300 people, but during the Vietnam unpleasantness, there were 33 of us in uniform, and that's about a tenth of our population. So, anyway, the reason I started talking about the military thing is I was just at a memorial for this Chinese guy who was a veteran of World War II. He died in June 6th. He was 95 years old. And they asked World War II veterans to stand, and I think there was only one left from them. So they're disappearing pretty fast. Anyway, these command words. Somebody knocks on the door. Katsla! Come in. Katsla! Kats! I think is there a line under the K? I forgot to do that. Because if there's a line under the K, that's your head. Bring your head in here, I guess.
Why don't they say bring your nose in?
Nobody knows what the nose knows. Speak, beak. Yeah, I used to be kind of nosy until I got my nose broken a couple of times. It's not in this one here.
Katsla. Yeah, this one.
Katsla. Yeah,
Did I make a copy for you?
what's that?
Do you need a
Is
copy?
that the same one I got?
I don't have one of those.
Can you make another copy?
Yeah.
for
Okay.
Michelle?
You need a couple copies?
Oh, I've got some extra ones here.
Oh, do you?
Somebody else missing one?
We need a couple more.
Yeah, I guess so. But Kutzlaw is just inviting the person to step through the door when they,
Oh, I have this one. Oh, I just don't have the other one. Oh, this one, yeah.
oh, here's one that's not stapled.
Oh. I don't know.
See, it used to be when people, they didn't knock at the door. They hit beside the door.
Wasn't the door just a piece of leather or cloth?
No, this is just, like, even the modern houses, but even the,
The wall beside the door.
yeah, the long houses, it was announcing your presence. That's why you'd hit beside the door, because who knows, maybe it has a blanket or something, and they couldn't hear you if you're doing that. But if you announce your presence, then they know you're not an enemy. But if you come sneaking in, somebody's going to whack you. So Katzla is just how you respond when they knock at the door. And then when you step to the door, they'll say, Kautla, Kautla, sit down, Kautla. But we didn't have chairs. But the house was terraced. There was about 3 or 4 steps, but they're usually about this high and about 6 feet back, maybe a bit more, so that the bottom level is where the fire pit was, and every day it was the responsibility of the boys to bring in clean sand. They would always keep it clean because they said, what they would say is you have to come to everything clean, whether it's your food or your mate, not only in the physical sense, but also your mind has to be clean too. So, if you're laying down in bed, that HL sound, HL, like antler, HL. And the pinch of the K is and the double A is like the A in father. Yeah, Katlusla, you know. I don't want to.
Sounds like our word for owl. It's like a, except that we have an SH in front of it. Shkadula.
Oh, our owl is Gutkanis. That's the sound that they make. Ooh, ooh. And when it's making that noise, they used to tell us, don't go outside. It's saying the spirits are walking. Gutkanis Tigwa. Gutkanis Tigwa. And so they keep all the kids in the house. Sneaky, those persons. But if you don't want to get out of bed, Wang. Yeah, I don't want to, I'm lazy.
Sounds like me.
Then I think that was my favorite wine. I don't want to.
Oh, I thought you meant my favorite wine. I'm like, which kind?
Oh, well, the way I heard it, I had a mentor for screenwriting. His grandfather and his grandfather's brother built the first synagogues in Edmonton, synagogue. And he asked me, he said, Woody, you know what the favorite Jewish wine? Huh? come Mrs. Schwartz got a mink coat and I didn't? That's where I got that part from him. But then Titla, the double I is pronounced like E, A, and bean, E, T, T, and then the D-I-I is D, refers to this person, D, T, Titla, Titla. That HL, TL, and DL sounds are very common in the Welsh language, and you find a lot of it here. So I guess being humans, we don't have sort of an infinite number of muscles to be able to speak. So there's some common sounds, and then huck, that hucksta is hurry up, or let's go hucksta. Or sometimes they take the short form and just say huck. You know, that means, you know, get ready, huck. The gutsa, watch me. Kwai is the weight, kwai. But kwai is also my older brother. The kwailong is my older brothers or my brothers. And kwai is the older brother or sister, it's an older sibling. And dun or dunai is the younger sibling, because it can be either male or female, because we don't have gender pronouns. But kwai means the weight, and then you see that possessive apostrophe in front of the W. That means you hold the air in, tighten your abdominal muscles, and it becomes waya, wah. Sort of like a trumpet, wah wah. Wah. Duck is sta. The KW is just duck. You don't pronounce the W, duck. You just mouth the sound, duck. Kind of weird duck, huh? Ducks. The HL ducks is, not is da. And there's an accent mark over that A that means the vocal inflection goes up. Duck is da. Huh? Duck with HL? True. Duck. So you make the W. Duck. Instead of W, it's wah. Duck with star. And then waji. Waji is da. Waji is da. Do that. Waji is da. Take this. Aju NY is da. Take half of it. See, there's certain sounds that are almost silent.
This is not pronounced.
If you don't pronounce the W, it becomes duck. So it becomes duck. So the mouth goes duck. And when you get used to when you become familiar with it, it sounds almost like duck sound. So this is just making sure that you get all those,
Nuances?
huh?
Nuances?
No, syllables. So you get all the syllable sounds.
Well, I didn't hear you say DHL.
Huh?
You did that last week.
Pardon?
You did that last week.
I know.
Handler.
I was waiting for it again.
Oh, it was GP. GP.
Just that word. You only said the first part, and then you skipped to the, I was waiting.
Which one?
This
Oh, I see.
syllable.
It's very, very quiet.
Está. No, the wolf goes up because that's one. Está. 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 So the word goes shut. Está. This one's Haji. 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 Stop. See, that's why we talk slow. Because if you make too many mistakes. Yeah, most people are big fun about
Blur.
They say we talk too slow. All the language people count to 10.
Alphabet down.
I'll put it on Daniel. One last class.
My dad's brother, when he'd be telling a story, he was so, it takes so long, it was almost painful. He told one time he was stored at Harvard Church camp, he was sitting on a bullet to the coat, and he looked down, there's a bottle of whiskey down there on in the bottom of his ocean bottle. But he told me about it, but it was deep.
The TL.
But if you see it down there, so you have to hold it in the on it, so you can throw it down, get a bucket of water and pour it up.
Oh, okay.
Well, they put a long rope on it, we sunk it down by that bottle. And we use what looks like a toilet plunger, but the handle's about 5 meters long. We use it for scaring, because when you're pulling the net up, there's an opening where the fish can get out. So we use that plunger to keep them away from it. So Uncle Mate said, I was looking at it, and he said, and I put that,
So cool, and then I could fill in like that's
that plunger down there. Then that's the way he's telling the story. And it took him about an hour to tell the story. It took about 10 minutes to actually do. And then when you speak English, instead of using adjectives, you use your words. When you talk about something that was real small, or it was fast, or one guy was bragging about how smart his daughter was, and my cousin Raleigh said, "Gee, I didn't know anybody was that smart."
I am that.
I am that.
I am smart.
So I have should I have to wait till you get up there? Or should we do, like, can we do it here? About the women, I hear the medicine man, but also hear medicine woman.
Well, this Haida, as far as I know, wasn't restricted by gender.
No?
She's asking about medicine.
The only part that might have interfered was during menses. That person couldn't use that medicine because that's when her power is the greatest. And so if she even has negative thoughts, it can affect lots of things. So, like for example, say the doorway was over here, then over in this corner is where she would be isolated during the time of her menses. And all the hunting and fishing, war, whatever you call implements of the man would be over in that corner. So they're as far away as they can get, because even negative thoughts could affect Because it was always looked on the woman's power as greater than the man's. A woman can pierce the heart, it's so sweet, it's spitting medicine. And also, she's the, she has that magic of harmony. So it's not only negative, but it's also positive. So the important thing was always to try to keep things on, keep the waves small.
Thank you, Woody.
Because if the waves get big, you don't want to see that surf. You can. So, yeah, that one here. Aju. Aju. In Y. Aju in Y. In Y.
In like
Ista. Aju in Y. In Y. Ista. That word in Y. There was a guy at home, his name was East Lagua. East Lagua is what they called him, but that means he was half landowner. And he told me that his proper name was East Lagua. East Lagua is half of a walking stick. I don't know which it meant, if it was broken in half or it was split down the length, but it was half of something. But we didn't have. Vancouver. Jesus, my clock's going pretty fast. It's 6 minutes to 8.
Already?
And I haven't said anything. I've been talking, but I didn't say anything.
You didn't notice.
Boy, you're just talking.
Yeah.
What was the last word you just said?
But anyway, this thing here I wrote here about Haida Aiga. It's that third paragraph down says it's different from about being a warrior. This person was referred to by this label only when en route to or engaged in or returning home from a fight with another nationality. And the person remained Haida until entered the Saulnai, that steam house. The floor of that house was covered with branches of the western hemlock tree. And then the person had to be treated to medicine for bringing him back from the dead. So when you kill somebody, it's like you're dead too. So it's bringing him back from the dead. So once he did that, then again a human man is peaceful, but this is also true of women. When this was going to be a pretty serious fight, women would be in the canoe too. And the men would paddle the canoe until they got within striking range of their objective. Then the women would take over the paddles. And they would go in, and they became very, very adept at being able to swing that big canoe around. So it came in stern first. You see the pictures, the Haida canoe, it has real high bow. And to make an amphibious landing, to jump off the canoe from there is rather difficult, but it would come in stern first. It's low enough to where they could jump ashore. On one of those raids to the, what's the name of those people in the state of Washington, that hunt whales? Macaw. Macaws were short people, and Haida canoes were going south. And the tide was out, and the Haidas were going close by the shore, and these macaws had something like bear paw snowshoes, the small round ones, and they were running on top of this. It was a mud flats. They were running on top and challenging these Haidas to come up and fight, and they kept ignoring them. So they started calling them bad names, like slave and whatever. So Haidas decided to teach them a lesson. So they swung around. They came in stern first, and these big Haidas, because the European or the Spaniards described the average height of male as 5 foot 10 inches tall, weighing about 240 pounds. Well, these guys were about 5'6" to maybe 5'8", maximum, and about 130 pounds. And anyway, these big Haidas come charging out there, going to teach them a lesson, and they jumped right into this mud flats, and they sunk in the mud right up to their knees. And that's what the macaws were waiting for. Run along knocking Haidas in the head. So I would tell this. I mean, we were always told stories about how we lost, because you can learn more from that than you can from about winning. But I would use this when we're doing environmental stuff. And the principle behind it, when you're dealing with a big corporation or whatever, nobody would challenge our canoes on the open ocean. So if they couldn't get at us on the canoes, then the objective is to get them out from behind their technology and knock them in the head. Rather than fighting technology with technology. And so I started teaching people how to monkey wrench, how to sneak in logging camps, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. But wherever you do it, don't tell anybody. Because you can't ever get caught if you don't tell anybody. You tell one person, it's no longer a secret. Yeah?
Do you have Wheat-to-go stories?
Huh?
Wheat-to-go? Any Wheat-to-go ceremonies? About the Wheat-to-go?
That sort of a Wendigo-like thing?
Richo. Remember we went to Ancient Wisdom Rising down south of Sandra to meet the Richo people that were smoking cigars?
Oh, yeah.
And they were asking us, how did we come to knowledge? And we just said, I just know it. And they didn't believe you?
He almost got in a fight down there.
Yeah.
There was some kind of a Christian academy, and he started arguing.
Well, they were saying they were better than me. They said, well, there's no real difference between good and bad. Oh, yes, there is. I said, yeah, but everyone deserves a worthwhile, meaningful life. But they didn't want to agree with that. They were gooder. So I had to talk myself out of it somehow. And Woody just kept on wanting, hey, come on, back here. Oh, no, you're fine. Yeah, 16 guys.
I expected him to surround him and attack.
Are you talking about the Wetiko psychosis? The cannibalism?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you call it? Psycho?
I think I've heard it called different things, but I know it as the Wetiko psychosis.
The Mexico?
No, Wetiko. Wetiko. And it's a psychosis. It's cannibalism. It's what happens apparently to the Europeans. They've had this cannibalism psychosis of eating the life of other people. And so when they came here to Turtle Island, that's what they brought with them. So it's the Wetiko. But Woody also, I've also heard Woody talk about people, so when the white man came, his sting part is rotten on the inside. There's no spirit, no sense of connection with the all. Because of those stories, right? When the explorers came, people knew that if the circle was still with the cross, that they had stayed true to the original instructions.
See, with the Kanaka, the Hawaiian people, they refer to Europeans, you hear them use the word haole, but it's really two words, or two syllables, ha-ole. Ha is the breath of life. Holy is without. They're people without a spirit. And Ha is also the root word for spirit for us. The Ha. And I think the Egyptians, their root word for it was Ra. R-A. Ra. And there was another people that have one similar. But again, it's that same principle about these ones that would come among us with good sounding words. But like the cedar that grows tall and straight grained with twin tops, when sounded, it's hollow in the middle and its heart is stink. And I'd heard that said about that twin top red cedar. And so one of my cousins and I were looking for a big cedar for making an ocean-going canoe. And we found one that would probably fill the space between these tables. It was a very big one. And we had a chainsaw that had a blade that was about as long as this table and our bar. And when my cousin was looking up at it, I said, "What are you looking at?" And he said, "Look." I said, "Oh, I wonder if it's true." And he said, "Let's find out." He started that saw and he took that blade of that chainsaw and he pushed it as far as it would go into that tree. So I don't know, it went in about this far, I guess. And when he pulled that chainsaw back out, it was like there was a fire hydrant. The water came shooting out. I don't know, about from there to about here, about that far. And God, it was putrid smelling. Very, very putrid. And what it is, and for some reason, I don't know how the water gets in there, but that cedar rots from the center out. All cedars down, when they die, they rot from the center out. When we were kids, we used to play where they cut down big cedars, and there'd be a big stump that was just a shell. And we would make that our forts and whatever. And so if you see these cedar stumps with red, well, the remains of the wood is red, and it's real soft, you can dig it out. But for some reason, that twin top one, when you cut it down, the center is rotten and it smells very bad. Yes?
Hi. Is this the vendor's workshop?
No.
No,
Oh, sorry.
this is the language. But anyway, that's what they said, that these people would come among us like that. They said, but beware, because some of our own people will be like that too. And it said they would come on a vessel made of wood pulled by the wind. And then they would make a bigger one, and then another bigger one, and then they would make one out of something that was harder than stone that would pull itself through the water. And the vibration from that thing would cause serious disruptions in the ocean. And another part of it talks about this snake. You know, I guess it's a railroad that would pull itself across the land. So they talked about all kinds of things. One was the light bulb too. I wish I could remember his name, this guy from Skidegate.
Oh yeah, and the spider webs in the sky.
Oh no, they didn't say a spider web, they said a cobweb.
Cobweb in the sky.
Well, what it said was that there, the first shake, there would be a shaking. Oh, it says they'll lay a black ribbon across the land, and a bug would begin to crawl on that ribbon. And in the first shaking, it would be so violent, it would throw that bug into the air where it started to fly and would leave trails of dirt that would become diseases that become more and more complicated. And they would put a cobweb in the sky through which people could talk to each other from long distances. And so now we know that the first shaking was World War I. And that bug that was crawling on that ribbon was the automobile. That when it got thrown into the air, it became the airplane. And the cobweb in the sky, I guess, became radio signals to where people could talk to each other long distance. And they said at the end of that first shaking, that people would try to come together as one human race, I guess you might say, on the west coast of this thing we call Turtle Island. So in the 1920s, when the League of Nations was first organized, they were to meet in California, and so the Hopis and some of the other tribes asked for permission to address the nations of the world. Well, my namesake, President Woodrow Wilson, was president, and he said no, because if Indians were given this privilege or power, it would be a political hot potato, and they didn't want to have to deal with it. So that was from the 1920s until the 1940s. They start warning the U.S. government that if a second shaking comes, do not drop the gourd filled with ashes, for if you do, plants and humans will wither and die, or humans will wither and die like plants in a prairie fire, and nothing will grow for many seasons. And the second shaking will be heralded by a sign of life that appears in the east. It will twist and become a sign of death. And when that's accompanied by the sun rising in the west, will be the second shaking. And so we now know that that sign of life that twisted and became a sign of death was the Hopi sign of life, and the opposite was the Nazi swastika. So it became a sign of death. And the sun rising in the west was the flag of Japan, was a rising sun. So the sun was rising in the west, and that was the second shaking. And the gourd filled with ashes was the atomic bomb. And then they say that if a third shaking comes, it will be heralded by people living in a house in the sky on a permanent basis. It says in the morning, the sun will go up and will be shining on villages of stone that are so big that if you stand in the middle, you can't see out. And the people will wake up very slowly, like they've come through a long winter. Some will sleep late. Others will wake up early and start moving away from those places. And it said, in the morning the sun will be shining on them. In the evening, as the sun is coming down, those villages of stone will be holes in the ground with steam rising.
I missed that part, sorry.
Huh?
What did you say? The last little bit.
It says that these villages of stone, those villages of stone will be so large that if you stand in the middle, you can't see out. In the morning, the sun will, when the sun is going up, it will shine on those villages of stone. In the evening, as it's coming down, those villages of stone will now be holes in the ground with steam rising. And that'll be the third shaking.
About the railway and being the snake, when they came all the way to the west, they cut all the trees in BC, like all of those tall cedars, and then they started planting whatever trees from wherever around the world. And that one cedar that grows like that, all the cedars grow like one long post, but the one cedar that grows like that has columns comes from Lebanese cedar, the Lebanese cedar, so it comes from, so they planted their cedar here and then it filled up with water.
Their cedar is different from ours.
Yeah, but they planted all these trees here. It's here, the deodar cedar's here.
Well, see, our cedars here are really cypress. They're not cedars. The cedar comes from arid lands. You'll find them in Arizona, New Mexico, all down through the desert country. And the needles are round, and when it burns, it's a very bitter smell, and there's black smoke from it. And the tribes down there start getting the flat-needled cedar, which is ours, because it smells so good. But as to where it came from, as far as I know, we've had the red cedar for a very, very long time. They may have planted them in some other areas, but I don't know if they planted them here because the cedars from Israel and Lebanon, those areas, wouldn't grow here because it's too wet.
They plant them here because when they cut down all those big trees, the temperature wasn't a rainforest anymore because those big trees were gone.
See, one of the things about the Douglas fir that the spruce and hemlock's different is that the fir doesn't need shade to grow, but it'll provide shade for the others that need shade. So when they cut down the Douglas firs, the other ones couldn't grow either because there's no shade. And so on Haida, when they cut down the trees, when the alders started coming in, they started spraying them with a herbicide that's very toxic because they didn't want these seedlings or small spruce and hemlock to have to compete with the alder. But they almost wiped out everything because one, the alder break down the rocks and they fix the nitrogen in the soil and they provide shade for these young spruce and hemlock. And then by spraying the alder with that toxic pesticide, the deer were eating the leaves and the humans were eating the heart and liver of the deer, and that's where the toxins were concentrating. So we'd had very high levels of cancer on Haida. So every time science comes up with something, they create a problem. They try to solve it with their science, and they always make it worse. Even their mathematics, they taught us to believe mathematically that if one woman can have one baby in 9 months, then obviously 9 women could have one baby in 1 month. But 4 out of every 3 men have a problem with math. Did I say something wrong?
Oh my God, now I've heard everything.
Not quite. But see, what I do is, as long as we use humor, the mind doesn't have a chance to sort through and discard what they don't like. And so we can slip a lot of things past while you're laughing.
Yeah.
See, there's one old man from Colorado, he was Southern Ute. I asked him, those pronghorn antelope, and it's real flat out there, and there's no brush or anything. You can see all the way to the horizon. I asked him, well, how the heck do you sneak up on those things? He said, you don't. He said, you take a stick and you put it in the ground with a rag or something tied on a little flag. He said it's like courting a woman. You get their curiosity aroused. And they got to come and see what it is. That's how you catch them. So all the fancy talk in the world ain't going to get you anywhere. If you get people's curiosity aroused, I try not to be curious except for safe things that I read. Because the only thing I can't resist is temptation.